Welcome, everyone, and you're probably wondering why I've gathered you here. Well, this is the second panel at Compulsion Lite. Compulsion is Scotland's oldest tabletop role playing convention, and we are on hiatus this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but in its stead, we've organized a series of online events. So, this is the second day of Compulsion and the day we've got our panels, and you're now going to be watching the second of the two panels we've had on today. This panel is titled International Connections in Tabletop Role Playing Games Scotland and the World. One of the most exciting aspects of the TTRPG space is seeing how different communities and creators from around the world come together, share ideas, and grow in new directions. And this is especially important given that some of the most compelling and vibrant work within these communities often happens in the global south, where creators face a lot of barriers and obstacles to get their work an audience across the scene. This panel is giving us an opportunity to think through these various issues and inequalities and how we can best address them. And also, momatoes and I were talking earlier whilst we were setting up, and she mentioned the need to share knowledge between communities to make sure that all of the work that people do is sustainable and has a much wider impact. And that's broadly what we're going to be doing today. In a minute, I'll introduce all the panelists, but for now, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping announcements. So, as you all know, Compulsion is a charity convention, and this year we are raising money for Empty Kitchens Full Hearts. Empty Kitchens Full Hearts are a local charity that are fighting food poverty as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. They do a lot of fantastic work in providing meals for people in need. You can donate via the link on our Twitch page, or you can donate using the QR code on stream. All the donations go through our tip jar, and all the tips we collect at our stream will be going straight to the charity. And we acknowledge that we'll have a lot of members watching from further afield. If you'd prefer to donate to a charity closer to home, then by all means, please do donate to a charity that is similar in your area. We'll also ask all of our guests to nominate a charity of their choice from wherever they're from right towards the end of the stream. So I'll just talk very quickly about the format of the event. For the next hour, the panelists and I will have a chat, and then we'll open up the floor to questions for the remainder of the panel. Our audience can submit questions via the Twitch chat, so please feel free to submit any questions you have in response to what our panels say, or any other ideas you might want the panelists to shed some light on. We do encourage people to get involved. It's lovely to hear from all the people, and you can probably come up with a lot more questions than I possibly can, so please do. We at Compulsion are committed to making the space as inclusive and welcoming as possible. And we expect all of our panelists, as well as our audience, to treat everybody with kindness, respect, and compassion. We will not tolerate any kind of degrading or derogatory conduct or comments. If you're participating in the chat, we require you to follow our chat rules, and our mods will ban members if needed. Also, one of our panelists, Yubi, has Tourette's syndrome, where some of the symptoms include involuntary sounds and movements. Websites like the NHS and CDC have further information on the condition should you need some. Right. So in a minute, I'll just ask the panelists to introduce themselves, but very quickly, my name is Vivek Santayana, my pronouns are he, him, and I am the director of Compulsion. I will be facilitating this panel, and it is also my job to be the least qualified person on the panel, because honestly, you're here to listen to far greater minds than mine. But I'm assisted behind the scenes by Claire Bath, who will be moderating the chat along with Sophie Hine. So I'm now going to allow our wonderful panelists to be visible on screen and ask them to introduce themselves. Indrani, would you like to start us off?
Hi, everybody. My name is Indrani. My pronouns are she, they. I am a handmade dice maker from Mumbai, India, and I am also the co founder of Desis Dragons, which is India's largest TTRPG community. Our goal is to sort of bring the joy of tabletop role playing games to both Indians at home and across the world. And I'm really excited to be here and talk to all these wonderful people on the panel. So thank you for having me.
Amazing. Great to see you again, Indrani. I know we did do that live stream a while ago. Mamatos, do you want to introduce yourself next?
All right, hello everybody. My name is Momatoes. I am a game and visual designer from Manila, Philippines. I built and maintain the Across RPGC website and Twitter, where I help spread more awareness about creations and creativity of the Southeast Asian RPG scene. So I'm really, really happy and honored to be here and so excited for what the panel brings.
Amazing. We're delighted to have you here as well, Mamatos. The work that RPGC do is honestly one of our inspirations at Gias and Compulsion. Right. Wendi, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Wendy. I just woke up. I'm a writer from Brazil. I'm trans. My pronouns are she, they, and I guess that's it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for waking up for this, Wendy.
Yeah,
Time zone Sudoku is a very complicated game to play sometimes. Um,
I'm
and
honored
finally,
to
f-
be here.
and finally, from close to home, Yubi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Yubi. I do a lot of TTRPG writing and I also do a lot of accessibility work where my main kind of focus is on making digital content screen reader optimized and sort of working with like dyslexia and various kind of visual needs across digital spectrums. And then I write both indie games and also for Hit Point Press and a couple of anthologies here and there. So I'm also the one with Tourette's, in case you hadn't clocked.
Great. Well,
Just
thank
in
you so
case you
much,
were
Yubi.
wondering.
Thank you so much, Yubi. Right, so that's our wonderful panel, and it is such a delight to have everyone here. But as Wendy has just woken up, I think it'd be nice for us just to warm us all up for the discussion with perhaps a nice little icebreaker. So, yeah, would everyone just like to tell me what your experience of the tabletop role-playing scene has been where you are? Indrani, do you want to start us off?
Sure. For me, it started off with finding like-minded people on the internet. I didn't know that there was that nerd culture here in India, and I grew up in the outskirts of Mumbai, in the middle of nowhere, honestly. So there wasn't really much to go with there. But with tabletop role-playing games, I it was a friend who came from um, South Africa who had been playing there for a long time and introduced me over here to the game and a couple of our friends. And that's how we got started. And it's interesting to me that even that introduction had to happen from someone who had learned about it not in India, outside of India. But since starting, it 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 was at a point where the community, everybody knew each other. If you've played D&D, you probably know everybody who's played D&D. That's where we were at, say, last year or maybe 2 years ago. And now it's changing, it's growing. There are so many more people playing the game. It's been a very drastic shift from when I started, and it's been sort of that part where it finds momentum. So it's like very rapidly growing right now. But it's exciting to just be a part of it and watch it happen as it yeah.
Great. Momatoes, do you want to go next?
Right. So here in the Philippines, I've heard people were often surprised to hear that Adventurers League is popular. And it is. It's one of the biggest gateways to RPGs. And for the longest time, I believe D&D was the mostly the only way you could really get into tabletop RPGs. But with the efforts of the Gamers and Gaming Events group, with more and more online communities building up, that situation has also been shifting. So not only are there more entryways into the tabletop gaming, there are also more people to play it with. And something that has been really exciting me is the fact that it used to be mostly, well, sorry if you hear any basketball, there's a really fantastic championship happening just a few meters down the road. But it used to be, the average age used to be like mid 30s 40s, but with subsequent years it has been drastically getting lower. And now I've been seeing lots of very young people create indie games, even connect with each other, and it's been, I don't know, it's a really exciting time for Southeast Asian RPG creativity.
Wow, that sounds amazing and really inspiring as well. Wendy, what's it like in Brazil?
Where I live, it's I don't really have like a scene or a community, but once I started playing online, I found the RPG Latam community, which is amazing. They are some of the most passionate and talented people I've met, and they have this really we gotta lift each other up mentality, which mindset, which is great when you have like people trying to make stuff and make that stuff get seen by others. But it's also still a boys club basically, so it still has a long way to go, I guess. But I mean, some of my friends are boys. I like boys, but it's it's still too white male dominated. Uh, but at least they are good white guys, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully appreciate what you mean there, Wendy, about in terms of the work that still needs to be done to make communities more diverse. And finally, Yubi, what's your experience been like in, well, Scotland? Which is a weird question for me to be asking you, but I'd love to hear what your
So
perspectives are.
So I actually started out with RPGs when I was a student in Manchester. So I it was very much exactly as Wendy had just said. It was a very kind of like, white male dominated when I started kind of getting into it. And I was very lucky in that me and a group of friends, we all got into, I think it was like the Adventure Zone at the same time. And that kind of for a lot of us sparked like, oh my God, we have to try this. So I immediately went into a kind of like, very queer, like diverse in a queer and disabled group. And then when we kind of started to play like in public, it was a bit more of like oh, I'm DMing a game and some guy has just come up to me and tried to tell me how to do a rule. And I'm like, I know." So like there have definitely been things like that. But Fanboy 3 in Manchester was fantastic because they really pushed to like move beyond that. And like the owner really recognized that that was an issue and has, run lots of things from that. And then when I moved up to Scotland, 4 years ago, because I was already in the scene, I really quickly found a group of kind of like-minded friends and just did like one public play and then kind of retreated to people's homes and things like that. I think like another layer is like when you have like accessibility needs, playing in public can be quite hard. So like I'm always keen to be like, we've met everyone in public, we were all cool with each other, now let's get out of here. Um, but I have a lot of privilege in my favor, so I've often found it very welcoming, and I really only face kind of like microaggressions rather than like, like actual aggressions or anything. So I'm aware that like I've been really lucky with my experience, and I'm aware that it's not the same for everyone, even in Scotland.
Oh,
Wow.
absolutely. Wow, it's so delightful to hear so many different perspectives. One thing I find really striking is, I know Wendy, Indrani, and Momatoes, you've talked about a lot of online communities that have emerged, and I know you've done some public play events there, Yubi. Um, have you have these communities built up that have built up been predominantly online, or are there any sort of more in-person kinds of activities or events that happen in these various spaces?
Before in the before times, there were definitely in-person events, yes. And I think that was actually a really fantastic glue because it provided a very personal way of seeing people face to face, actually sitting down and getting to play a game with them. And it also helped that since everybody was gathered together in events, everybody was focused on connecting. With online, because it's asynchronous, it's been kind of a different way of interactions. But because of our current realities, doing going back to in person has been not yet possible.
Hmm.
And with Southeast Asia, it will take a long time before we can get people from various archipelagos together. So that is certainly a dream of ours.
Um, for me, what I've noticed with the fact that it being an online community is that it's become far more accessible, especially in India, where it's hard to come across D&D books or any TTRPG supplements because often you're paying in dollars and that's expensive. And the fact that the internet there exists, it helps to just allow people to meet people from across the country to come together and like find games on the internet on HIO or like on the piracy and but it basically like it's become accessible because of the lack of resources that need to go into playing, and not all of it has been um, available to people in the past. But there were smaller communities that were doing in-person events, and it was often event like it was often people who came in without the knowledge of what tabletop role playing games are. Like, this, I have a weekend off, let me give this a shot. And some people stick around, some people don't. But this community of people who come together because they love it in the first place, that's happened thanks to the online presence of an actual community space, right? I does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it's
Yeah,
similar here in Brazil. Like, as I'm not from São Paulo or Rio and those major centers, I don't have like Brazil has a great RPG presence, but not where I live. So I've never been like in a in-person event. I played with people I've met in high school, and that was it. And that was actually how I found these communities online when I couldn't play anymore with the people I used to play in person. I ended up finding others to play with, and that was when like this world opened up to me. And yeah, I think it's pretty similar that the online communities allow for a
Mhm.
greater ease of access,
yeah,
so you can find people and games and perspectives that you wouldn't have otherwise, and that's been
yeah.
marvelous to me.
Here in uh so there are certain metropolitan cities where, people with more privilege and access live. And um for me personally, I live in Mumbai, which is extremely like sort of urban, and there is generally more access to, say, nerd culture here. There's a comic con that happens and stuff like that. But there are cities like Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, and just places where these elements of nerd culture are like, even these sort of mainstream elements of nerd culture don't exist. But now, because of Desis and Dragons and this Discord server that we run, I get to play with people from across India, and that's not something that I would have even been able to dream of had it not been for this
I
virtual
mean,
space.
just to put this in perspective, I grew up in Chennai, and this is the first time I'm hearing about Mumbai Comic Con.
There you go. Yeah, it's honestly a glorified like line of kiosks for people selling T-shirts, but
Yeah.
it's great. I love it. It's the best we
Oh,
have.
Brazil has a Comic Con too. I've
Mm,
never been to it, and it's really expensive.
mm,
So that's it. You know, you have to pay for a plane ticket to go to São Paulo, and then the ticket to the con is expensive, and then you
mm,
have to have accommodation and you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
and
So,
online is so
um,
much easier.
yeah. So, Indrani, Momatoes, and Wendi, you've talked about, a very different perspective of on what these communities are like compared to what I'm used to, having lived in a capital city for 10 years. But I'm curious to know, what other barriers have you had to negotiate as creators trying to reach an international market, and what strategies did you use to overcome them? Indrani, do you want to start
I'll
us
go
off?
first.
Because I know you've got a lot to say about
Yeah.
like shipment fulfillment and stuff.
Oh my goodness. I think in terms of the community building aspect of things, right? It's hard to build an international presence when the presence at home is so small. So I think for me and the community we were building at Desis and Dragons, the first most important goal was to get local people into the space and be like, hey, this is a cool thing that you can do and it'll be really fun. Just give it a shot. And once we sort of had that momentum going, um, getting international eyes was a challenge because y- it's such a it's like a baby at this point, right? It's this tiny little thing that needs to be nurtured, and it's very hard to get people to put eyes on something that is still in such early stages of development. But I think people have been kind and receptive to what DCs has been doing, because like the fact that I'm here talking to you guys about this is already a testament to that notion, right? That people are open to international. When I say international, I mean non-Western voices um, having the say and giving them a place at the table, and inviting them to tell their stories. So I think I've been fortunate enough to be able to meet people who are happy to sort of pass the mic on or platform people who otherwise wouldn't have one. What has helped is honestly finding like-minded people on social media. I think social media can be a great tool but also a really harmful tool, but in terms of building communities internationally, it's been a great help because I've been able to find like-minded people who are interested in what we're doing, who are interested in spreading the word, or cross-pollinating communities, for example, right? So I think just the presence of social media and the ability to network through it. I know networking has a negative connotation, but it is in that sense networking, right? And so being able to have a space where I can talk to people from across the world, and because content is so freely available, they can just take a look at what we're doing, hop in, hop out. That ease of access again has helped. I guess that would be the strategy that I've used, right, in to gain visibility. In terms of barriers, it has to most likely just be getting people to invest time into what we're doing, because again, like it's a tiny thing, and how do you get people to give you enough attention to know that this is something good? I think that's been the
Mhm.
struggle.
What about you, Wendy?
I think I've just basically parrot what every other creator from Latin America says, but I guess first, um, our currencies in general are really devalued in comparison to like the US dollar. So we can, for example, pay for stuff and pay for collaborators, etc., out of our own pocket. So we gotta have, if we wish to make like a big project, we gotta have this starting money to account for that. Like 30% of everything I make is cut out from the start in taxes just because I'm from Brazil, and then I get the Brazilian taxes for international transactions. We can't host Kickstarters, so we depend on other people to host for us. We're always in this weird place where we can uh, back Kickstarters, but we can't host them. We can't create them. So they want our money, but they don't want to help us get money. And printing, shipping, etc. We can do that on our end, but money. So there's this aspect of like infrastructure and resources that I think it's a great barrier. And then I think people, we always uh, have this like communities that form like the RPG Latam and stuff that's really helpful, and that I saw Lucas is in the chat. Like Lucas is like a bastion along with like Wax and Manche. Uh, they they are like these people that are in this community that help each other, pull each other and stuff like that. But also gringos like Jared from Exalted Funeral came to me and said, "Oh, we want to publish your stuff." Or Zach and Matt from So Muppet did the Let's Breakout project. They just threw money at us and told us to do our thing, and that's it. We're gonna do a Kickstarter. Do your thing. I think that's a great way to help. And I think Indrani is right. It's networking, but it's organic, I guess. It's like you make friends and you play with people and you show people our stuff and people like your stuff and wanna, I hope so, I wanna sincerely help you. you know
Wow, you've highlighted some really big issues there in terms of structural barriers of like economic barriers like currency conversion and infrastructural problems like Kickstarters. Thanks for that perspective, Wendy. That's been really useful. Matos, what about you? What do you have anything further to add to this?
It's so hard to build on what Wendy and Indrani have already added. But I think for me, what the main challenges would be, just to add to that, is the challenge of being known, making your name, putting your name out there, doing the hustle, doing the marketing, juggling all of the responsibilities of being a creator, somebody in the community, the marketer, the chief cheerleader for your game and for everybody's games, while managing the expectations of a culture that is completely foreign to you and may have completely different view of what you are and what you're supposed to be creating. Sometimes it's just tiny micro things, like they expect you to be something else from how you are, or you feel like you have to present yourself differently to market better. All of these tiny things, individually, they feel like paper cuts, and after a while it's like, I'm so tired of marketing to Americans. Eventually I just want to be authentic to myself and make creations that I feel like I don't have to market specifically so that I could make money off of it. And that's, of course, to add to what has already been said by others.
That is really useful to hear, and thanks so much, Mamatos, for highlighting the personal dimension to this on top of the structural and political ones that Indrani and Wendy talked about. I'd like to pick up on something Indrani said about community building, and I think my next question really focuses on that. Indrani and Mamatos, both of you have built communities that span vast regions with both Desis and Dragons as well as the RPGC. What challenges did you face building such communities, and how do you retain the core values of these communities as it scales up in the with the pace at which it's been doing?
All right, so I think I also have to mention that RPGC wasn't something that popped up overnight, or nor was it something that I built. It was actually created as a hashtag, I believe, 3 years ago, by Pampunzalan, BJ Resho, Shautan, and many other friends from Southeast Asia. So it's actually been a long series of small actions that gradually built up so that we could have the foundation to knowing each other across different countries. And the challenge really has been keeping that steady pace, making sure that it doesn't fizzle or die down, making sure that the passion remains even throughout the years or even when it was just small. And I think one of the wonderful things that has helped manage the challenge is the fact that we acknowledge there's no one center. Like, we don't say that only one person is calling the shots. RPGC is actually fairly decentralized, and that has made some things challenging, like doing really exciting big shot initiatives has been a challenge. But it has also meant that it's kind of a low burner, sustainable thing where anybody can reach out, anybody can propose things, and it will be considered as a community. So the challenge has been keeping that decentralization and making sure that it helps be sustainable for next few years, not just for today.
Over here with Desis and Dragons, I think it's a community that is extremely queer friendly, and it's a safe space for people of marginalized communities, and that's a very conscious choice we had to make. It wasn't even a choice, it was just, we knew this is how it would have to be. But a challenge that we ran across originally was not everybody who is into tabletop role playing games is someone who subscribes to that thought process, right? And we had to decide early on that a place that is safe for everyone is safe for no one. You have to take a stand and you have to stick to it, especially in a country like India where um, you know politics around the LGBT community and politics around marginalized communities, people who are Dalit, people who are not, Hindu Brahmins, um, living in metropolitan cities. Life is very different for uh, people from these communities. And our goal was from the get go to make a space where people would come in and be like, okay, I belong. There is a seat at this table for me. And I think that's been the largest challenge in the sense that enforcing it has often led to some uncomfortable discoveries or um, points where you have to be like, you are not welcome here. And that's never a nice thing to say to someone, but when you know that this person isn't as inclusive as we expect our community members to be, then they have to stay away. And those are some uncomfortable conversations, but I think that's all a part of managing communities, right? You build a space and you have to be very conscious of the kind of space you're building. And I've had experience doing it for, I was managing like online communities when I was 14, 15. So I've been doing this for a while. Maybe not the best idea for a kid to be doing it, but it certainly helped me to know what an ideal version of it should look like. Um, and the other barrier specifically was um, asking for commitment, because when you come to play tabletop role playing games, you're spending 2 to 3 hours and sometimes it's with strangers, right? So um, how do you tell someone who's never done it before to just go, this is going to be fun, trust us? So like building a space that makes people feel comfortable enough is also important, outside of just be taking a stance. So I think just managing people's expectations, making sure they feel welcome, and making sure they have the resources. Vivek, you remember this. You had a strange experience in one game, and that sparked our discussions of, okay, we need to make sure everybody knows what safety tools are and how they can use it in their games. And that was a whole thing. And we made sure we implemented that. So anytime somebody, for example, is like, hey, I'm looking for a game or I'm going to run a game, we're like, here's all the resources you need and please use them. And we caution everybody who now runs a game to use them. So it's that process of constantly learning and adapting, but also sticking to your guns about what that space should look like. I think
That's amazing. It's been so delightful to hear, Indrani. And it was quite weird for me to be on the other side of that interaction, because normally I'm the person who's in your place. But the stuff that you've been doing at Desis and Dragons for inclusivity has been really inspiring. And likewise, Momatoes, what you talked about in terms of very local, decentralized communities, is quite a remarkable insight for us to sort of bear in mind. But we've talked about community building, and another aspect to what a lot of you do is, designing games. And I know, UB, you've contributed to the Uncaged anthology, and uh, Wendi, you have also made a game that is explicitly anti-capitalist and queer. And Momatoes, your Arc is one of the most gorgeous games I've seen in a long time. I'm really curious to hear from the three of you about what inspires you to make the kinds of games you play and make the kinds of games you design. And what do you think draws people to these kinds of games? UB, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I mean, felt really lucky to be included as part of the Uncaged anthology. That was a fantastic experience. I think for a lot of the games that I create now and a lot of the writing that I do, an example is that when I was working with the Hit Point Press team on their Heckner adventure, it was really great because I got to have a really refreshing conversation about pronouns. And so I was saying that like every time a character is introduced, we should have their pronouns after their name. And then what we should also have is not just kind of she, her, and he, him. We need to have they, them, and neo pronouns and she, they. And so Heckner is filled with, neo pronouns and kind of like combinations of pronouns. And Hit Point Press have now like taken that concept of whenever a character is introduced in their material, their pronouns are like after their name, and it's just like a staple part of like their writing and design process, which is something that like I'm really proud of, and I'm really like pleased that they were willing to work with me on that. And then for a lot of the kind of the games that I will kind of create on my own, a lot of them are kind of based on that feeling of, and obviously like I speak from a place of being queer and being neurodivergent in Britain, which is very kind of class based, and like I really don't fit into the kind of like world that I was kind of born into and all of this, and I'm kind of like the weird one in the family type thing. So a lot of my games kind of speak to that feeling of like something is going on and I don't quite know what it is, and I'm kind of trying to discover that. And so like in games I've written, like What Is Here, which is a game about like myth building through short vignettes, and then I've just released one, a solo journaling game called Haunt, where you're a trapped ghost trying to reconnect with the living and rediscover yourself. A lot of it is kind of because I spent so long going like but going like, what is wrong with me, like what's happening, what's all of this, that a lot of the games I write kind of explore that, um, and hopefully provide like a space to reflect on that and to help start bringing people into maybe perspectives that they haven't considered before. So I think that most people write from some part of themselves that's looking for answers, and I think the games that you write are ultimately kind of in some form questions that you may be asked or asked yourself, and I think that's kind of what I rely on when I'm doing stuff now, is that kind of, yeah.
That's amazing. Momatoes, do you want to go next?
Oh, that was such a really lovely answer by Yubi. And I think I really want to pick up what she said about discovery. And I feel that that's also where a lot of my games come from. Sometimes it can be as silly as discovering how far a coin mechanic can go, or rock, paper, scissors can go in becoming a system for an RPG. But sometimes it can be things like, how can something abstract like a system interact with how um, we create social dynamics in our group, we create interactive dynamics in our stories. And for me, a lot of those seemingly mechanical explorations come from a fascination with how tabletop gaming really enables us to have experiences that are different from fiction, different from TV, by giving us codified rules or repeatable systems that we could replicate. So it's a bit of a nerdy answer, but one thing I love about having communities is they can also help you explore these ideas, this discovery with the safety net, with fellow passionate people. So I really love that there are people who share the same hobby and passion with me and the creation process as well.
Nerdy answers are always welcome. Wendy, what about you?
I loved both UB's and Momato's answers because also I get to build upon them. Because especially the exploring part, I was before I started making games, I was already a writer, and I approach writing games as another medium to write. So it has its own unique attributes, its own language, its own genres, its own audience expectations. And I think what tabletop games are great for is exploring themes and ideas instead of a single narrative, instead of like a direct fiction like Momato said. And that's what attracts me to make games. And I have these questions and themes, like both of them that I want to explore, and that maybe I want people who are playing the game to think about and to put themselves in that specific positions. Like, I don't remember who said it, but someone said about film that film is like an empathy machine that builds empathy. And I think that's true for fiction as a whole, but I think games, especially tabletop RPGs, have a specific way of building that empathy, that is you playing as someone. And I think that's really precious, and that allows you to create a specific experience that I don't find as a writer in other mediums. And so, for example, my next game, Here There Be Monsters, I wanted to explore the idea of reclaiming monstrosity, reclaiming uh, uh, those things about ourselves that are seen as disgusting, as not part of society, as something that needs to be tamed or contained or annihilated. So I could write a story about it, but I think it's way more powerful to let people play with that idea and just give them the tools to do that. And I think that's it.
Amazing.
Sorry
Well,
if that's too much.
no, that is absolutely fantastic, Wendy, because you've just set up the segue for the next question very tidily. So you mentioned how a lot of your games were inflected by your perspective of being someone who is queer and neurodivergent. And Indrani, you've talked about the importance for a community like Desis and Dragons to be as inclusive and queer friendly as possible. This is really a question for everyone on the panel. There's such a strong presence of queer and neurodivergent communities within TTRPG spaces. Um, do you believe that TTRPGs have provided a safe haven and means for expression of these underrepresented groups? I know, Wendy, in your case, you've talked about games exploring these ideas of monstrosity and reclaiming that. And in what other ways can games and gaming spaces become politically liberatory?
Who wants to go first?
It's a very difficult question, so no wonder
Yeah.
we're all like, hmm.
Yeah, we were
I think,
building up to this all
yeah.
along. Don't worry about it.
For me, tabletop RPGs have such an amazing potential to be cathartic. I think Wendy has already highlighted this, but we can explore so many deep themes, and we can do so with such deeper empathy by doing role playing, placing ourselves in different stories, adopting different perspectives. But having that kind of cathartic potential also makes us quite vulnerable. So while we can be very free to express new identities, gender, explore mature or difficult themes like political liberation, it can also make us it can also put us in danger of like bad actors, or it can put us in danger of fascism or just really horrible ways that you can abuse this wonderful but very fragile thing. So I think this is exactly where it's important that we keep the communities have strong principles to make sure that RPGs don't abuse this potential, and that it continues to be a healthy, positive way of processing complex themes and emotions.
I think what Momato said is completely correct in the sense that there's such power in it, and I know just from personal experience of my own, as well as like plenty of friends, that when you're kind of given that freedom to kind of go, ooh, well maybe I'll play a character that's not my gender, and then a few years later someone's like, well, I'm trans, and I'm like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, good. So like it has that power to kind of go, this thing that I've maybe been wondering about, like I can explore that in this safe space with exactly as we said, with kind of codified rules to understand how the social actions or interactions are going to go. You have this strong code of ethics where you know that like you're not going to face like in fantasy world homophobia and things because you've already agreed that's not a thing we're doing. So you kind of have this like double triple safe space within which to explore these things, which can be really, exactly as Momato said, cathartic and important. But on the other hand, there's a great phrase within the disability community, which is know about us without us. And what can happen is that people who are trying to, and I always try and, benefit of the doubt, they're trying in good faith to kind of either write about or put out like a point of view or an identity or a disability or something that isn't their lived experience, and it can come across as at worst it's just awful representation and it's a cash grab, kind of I want to profit from this thing that's going on, and at best it's just kind of like ooh, ooh, so close, but also it feels inauthentic. And I think that exactly as both Indrani and Momatos were saying, that sense of having that really strong community that includes people who are queer, who are diverse, who are disabled, people of color, and kind of exactly, I think, as Indrani was saying, handing that microphone over and being like, I would love this story to be told. I am not the person to tell it, but here is somebody who maybe is and who's interested. Here's the floor, like, please. And I think that when we think about as publishers and as people who are putting something out into the public space, when we think about the stories and the themes that we want to challenge, can you maybe break it back? Can you say, rather than what is it like, for example, to play someone who is, what is it like to write a story about someone who's queer and I'm not queer? Bring it back. What is it like to write a story about not fitting in and like going against the grain? Like you can pull it back from an identity and still explore that theme without trying to then rely on an identity that isn't yours. And of course, like queer is a difficult one because a lot of people are in the closet and you shouldn't have to kind of divulge and everything. But it's just always a thing I think to try and keep in mind is, am I the right person to tell this story? If I'm unsure of that, is there a way to take a central theme and write about that rather than trying to then attach it to an identity that might come across as inauthentic? And if I am unsure, can I maybe find a safe place to like explore that within myself until I am a bit more sure? And I talk to people and I feel like, okay, yes, I do have a grounding, to write this.
I
Mm,
think Momatoes and Yubi had such great insights, and it's hard to add to that, but I think with tabletop role playing games, historically, have they been inclusive? I don't think so. I mean, the earliest editions of D&D had like a seduction table for women, and women didn't have charisma, they had beauty stats, and there was stuff like that, right? So we didn't start off at a great point, I would say, but tabletop role playing games are the people who play them and the people who build those games. And I think as that changes, as that grows, as people like Yubi and Momotos and Wendi find places to write games based off their lived experiences, that changes, right? So I think they're providing safe havens now because the people creating these games, and I think always turn to indie games when it comes to when it comes to finding authentic experiences being told. Um, so I think it's changing now. And even with the bigger companies, WotC, for example, something like Radiant Citadel coming out, which is written entirely by people of color, that's significant. So I think we probably did start off at a great point, but as people become more aware and more open to hearing about experiences that might not necessarily always match their own, that changes. And in other ways that we can be politically liberatory, I can't say that word. I think just having spaces to build trust with each other, because at the end of the day, a tabletop role playing game is you and the people you play it with. So having the ability to trust, having the space to trust, have is important. And as long as we're fostering environments where people can be like, I can let my guard down, I can be vulnerable with you, that's important. And I think that allows people and neurodivergent people and marginalized people to explore their lives and their trauma, their happiness, their everything about them through games. So yeah, I think it's changing.
I just want to add a few quick stuff, building on what the three of you said. Like, first, I think it's really fantastic to me how many trans people there are in the RPG space. Like, it's visible. Like, you get to play and experiment with being someone else, and then your eggs start to crack, and then like it's like, oh no, I just like to play female characters, it's not like there's something there. And then, oh yeah, I'm trans. It's a thing. uh or instead like playing monstrous races, and no, it's just I don't like being human, it's boring. um but yeah, I think there's great possibilities of RPGs as means of expression, yes, but not as safe havens, as people said. So that comes from the community part, as Indrani and Momatoes and Yubi were saying. So I just wanted to agree. And like, I can't I I can't represent anyone apart from myself. So I'm just one trans woman from Brazil. I'm not trans women from Brazil. You know, I'm not trans women. I'm not transes. You know, and so I think the thing is, even I couldn't write authentic, completely experiences. So what I can do is draw from my personal experience and try to say what I can or what only I can, and that's why I, for example, chose monstrosity instead of queer experience, because everyone, I think, can empathize with being somehow anomalous to standards of normality, you know, of normalcy. I always forget. Uh, but what I think is, even it's not like being part of marginalized group is not like is not a guarantee that we're gonna get it right. It's like it's not even fair to us to put that expectation on ourselves too, you know. And yeah, I forgot the train of thought. Sorry.
Well, no, thanks for that, Wendy. That's been incredibly illuminating because, I know there's a similar saying in the autism community that when you know one autistic person, you know precisely one autistic person. And
Yes.
yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't expect any one person to stand for an entire community. And there's something very reductive in the way, and reductive in tokenizing in the way some people are seen to stand in for wider communities. How have you? See, we've talked a lot about the need to pass on the mic and make sure we, adequately represent communities. But how do we then make sure that this representation isn't just tokenistic and we don't reduce the entire community on one person's work, reputation, or background?
I think it's simple. You help a lot of people from different backgrounds. You don't just take one and lift it up. You help a wide variety of people get the mic and tell their different experiences. You can be satisfied because one person got it. You know, you gotta keep going until until you die, I guess, until all the systems of oppressions are burned down to the ground. You gotta keep going.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it sort of highlights the fact that building communities, making safer spaces, making a better space future is a continuous effort. Like we have been making a lot of strides, but they were only made possible because we kept on going despite the setbacks, despite the disappointments. And these are not just past disappointments, there will be current and future, and we will face them, but we're getting progress and we will make progress. And it is a thing that we will have to do.
Yeah, and for already what Wendy said about having multiple voices on the same project, but I think it's holding yourself as a creator accountable to make sure that when I put my work out there, I think as people of color or as people from marginalized communities, like Wendy said, right? The only experience Wendy can talk about is her own. So I think that's a consciousness that we should all have, um, about being creators, is that when I put my work out into the world, I'm putting my work out into the world, and there will be people who will find themselves in it and who will find their likeness in it. But again, it is a story that they can then adapt and build on. So always having that consciousness that you don't speak for everyone is important, I think.
And I think it's also
Yeah.
really important to start, this goes from anything, and I can talk from like an accessibility point of view, but like you have to start from the foundations. You can't just bring it in at the last minute. It can't be tacked on. It can't be like, someone called me out because I don't have X, so here's the thing. If you're
Yeah.
genuinely thinking, okay, like I've recognized some issues in my work, whether it's as a solo creator or part of a larger collaboration, and if you're noticing things, you have to find a way to work those things in from the very foundation. And that might mean like changing the scene around you. It might mean changing your workflow. It might mean doing a whole bunch of things, to get to that. But I think if if you are serious about wanting to make those changes, then it's really important to do so. And I also think, in that same vein, it's really important to recognize that in the indie scene, a lot of marginalized solo creators are trying to do everything and to do so many things that big companies are just kind of not doing. And there has to be a bit of grace and space held for people who are, you know, from a marginalized community, who have done so much work and who are staring down the barrel of like, oh, I didn't think about making my PDF accessible. How am I going to do that? I can't afford to, bring someone in who's going to do that. And I think there just needs to be like a little bit of understanding and space held for people who are clearly trying their best and who are aware and who are working on problems within their actual scope, because you cannot expect a single creator to have the resources, the time, and the software, the education, the ability to do what big companies should be and often aren't doing. So I think holding that nuance is really important in this space,
Yeah.
especially as it's growing.
So, Wendy,
Honestly,
were you
that
gonna?
didn't even. Sorry, please go on.
I was just gonna check. Wendy, were you gonna say something?
No, I was agreeing, and I was just gonna add a little thing, but Indrani can go ahead.
Cool. Indrani?
Please, please.
No, go ahead, please.
Roll
Okay.
initiative.
Oh boy, where's my D20? Where's my emergency D20?
I've got mine on
I,
my necklace. So anyway, Indrani, you go for it, and then we'll get to Wendy.
I was saying that I didn't even consider that like when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about it from my own perspective, and it's interesting that you point out that it is an act of kindness towards yourself and others, and I think that's important to keep in mind too, because I don't often consider whether or not, like, do I have the resources to do everything and do everything right. I'm just like, you must. So I think that's a thing that a lot of individual small creators can relate to, is the sense of responsibility and perfection in everything you put out. And I think it's important to be kind to ourselves in that space. So I think that's a great point. That's all I
Wendy,
wanted to say.
Wendy, what were you planning to add?
Oh, it's good that you said that because I heard what Yubi said and I agreed with everything, but I didn't thought of applying that to myself, and that's a good thing to hear. Yeah. But I was gonna say that I come from another industry. I'm a screenwriter also, and I've been in a lot of writers' rooms, and you can touch the difference when the writer's room is made from the ground up with trying to be inclusive. I hate that word, but I can't think of another one right now. Trying to be diverse also. And when it's like an emergency thing for quota sakes, to fill the tokens. I've been in so many writers' rooms that were like a bunch of white guys, and they try their best, but they're so used to the same perspectives that even hearing some stuff can be a shock, can be like, oh, I'm not racist. What, how can you think that of me? That's not what I intended. And when people build their teams with that kind of diversity of opinions and backgrounds in mind, that makes all the difference because they're open to different perspectives. And I think that applies to all creative collective endeavors.
Amazing. That's really a rich breadth of perspectives to hear about this. And Indrani and Wendy, thank you so much for your perspectives from different industries, but also your exhortation for us to be kind to ourselves. I'm going to be good and just ask one more question of my own before we turn to our audience for all the questions they post in the chat. Just a reminder to our audience: if you do want to submit questions for our illustrious panelists, you can do so via the chat. One of our moderators will be passing them on to me, so don't worry about anything getting missed out. I'm just going to circle back to something we said at the top of the discussion, where I know, Wendi, you mentioned a number of structural barriers that we face in terms of currency conversion and the inability to start Kickstarters in different parts of the world, and other such problems with both economic, structural, and infrastructural problems. And you mentioned a few collaborations that helped you in these endeavors with various publishers. So really, this question, to wrap us up, is a broader question of how we in Scotland and in the West more generally can work with creators and communities from the global South to better support voices that are marginalized within our current market.
First of all, give us money. Um, your money is way more valuable to us than to you, like literally. And give us money by both buying our stuff, but also, for example, what Soma did with Let's and
Hey
Breakout.
Google,
That is.
turn on the lights. I'm sorry, I was supposed to be muted for that. It's getting dark and I can hardly see anything.
Right in the middle of such a wonderful, important thing that Wendy was saying.
I am so sorry. I can't.
Anyway, Wendi,
No problem.
you were saying,
Sorry.
Doing what Soma did with Let's and Breakout. That is, hey, here's some starting money for you to get your project going, and then we're doing a Kickstarter to cover for it, like that kind of thing. Not only buying the stuff, but helping some projects get off the ground. That's a thing. And also, I think just being allies to um, other people in the specific global South communities that aren't uh, there aren't like the white guys of their communities. Like as I said, like I love my white guys in the RPG Latam. They are great white guys. They are the best white guys that I know. There's nothing wrong with being white guys, but there's definitely a problem with there being a place where the majority of it is composed of white guys. And I think that's not just a matter of like, oh, representation, we exist, we are valid, but of who has the means to dedicate their time to do the work that's necessary to actually be a part of it and to actually get the work out. And I think that comes to the structural problems that I talked about.
absolutely. And thanks for that, Wendi. I think you've highlighted a very key distinction between personal issues of, being white guys and the structural problems that inhere in structures that are dominated by white guys. I think that's a very useful insight that you've sort of just brought us. What about the rest of you? Do you have anything further to add about this broad question to what Wendi just said?
I need a moment to recover. So somebody please answer. I think you're muted, momatoes. We can't hear you.
Am I muted? Okay,
Oh
perfect.
yeah.
So I
Opposite
now
problem.
took the spotlight away from you. So that's my contribution. But I will be, I guess, giving extremely practical guidelines. So Wendy has said the best way is to throw money at us. And I think for some people, there is definitely willingness, but maybe there is some confusion like, how do I find games that I like? How do I know how to support people when I'm not very familiar with the community? So luckily, RPGC has had the work done. If you go to across-rpgc.com, that is basically a very nice database or very wonderful looking website where you can even view some of the Southeast Asian games that are already available out there. It's a small microcosm. You will be able to find more by going to Twitter, following the across_RPGC account, following Southeast Asian tabletop creators, and then just exposing yourself, new perspectives, new games. It doesn't have to be the same game every single time, the same adventure. You can embrace new stories. And once you found the one that really speaks to your heart, you throw money at it really hard. Put on more tips, and it will absolutely help us.
Yeah, also search for RPG Latam. There's like this gem going on, and in the community tab, there's a list of like a lot of games. There's other lists, but I can't remember right now who made them, but I know that in the gem there's a big list.
Wendy, could you just plug the jam very quickly? I realized this was the other thing I forgot to do last night, and that was make a note to myself about what the Latam jam is about.
Oh, it's about doing stuff, making stuff for based on Latam RPGs. It's
Amazing,
just that.
cool. And
And
when
then there's
and
this big list
mm,
of Latam RPGs that you can take a look and see what we're doing. It's great.
cool. And Yubi, is there anything you'd like to add to the discussions that we've been having?
I mean, you know, Wendy and Momatoes and Indrani over the course of the conversation have said like the most important things. I think I would just add to be really mindful, which is the thing that I always, try to do of intersectionalities, like you can be, one or two marginalized identities. That doesn't mean that like you understand what it's like for everyone else. I think also like as from talking from the pound sterling, often our money gets converted into dollars, which is not a huge thing. For us it's relatively similar, but I think that when you're thinking, okay, I want to hire somebody to do work, is if you see people who are offering in a different currency from yours something that's like really really low because that's the currency from from that person's standpoint, don't pay them those rates, pay them the rates that you would pay someone in your currency. And I think that like if you go into it with like, okay, my art budget for this is like 50 quid, say, which is British currency, and I want like to find, two or three pieces that I can pay 50 quid for, don't then go and like, oh, this person will give me 30 or 40 for that. Stick to those guns that you've decided and say, okay, well, I want this person's art, so I'm going to pay that 50 quid for two or three pieces, and to just kind of like just be really careful that you're not actually exploiting people who are trying to get in on the scene because you are holding a position of economic power. And I think from the opposite standpoint, one thing that I always say in my accessibility rates is that I will always negotiate with people from like marginalized like communities, but also from people with economic disparities. And so like I'm always open to like talking about bartering or talking about, okay, like because I understand like I'm freelance, I live off this, but also my work on accessibility becomes inherently inaccessible to people from different economic disparities, and I'm like, well, that's not cool, I don't like that. So trying to find those ways in which you know you can balance that out, I think is a really important thing to do.
That is a really valuable point there, Yubi. I think you've highlighted a very important caution to all of us to not replicate the same kinds of colonial hierarchies by exploiting people from places where our currency would be disproportionately more powerful. I think that's a really valuable thing to
We're
highlight.
very good at it, we've got a long
Oh yeah,
history of it, so like just watch it.
Indrani, have you recovered yet?
Yes, I am so sorry one more time, but to build on what Yubi said, something I do for my handmade dice um, is that I have subsidized pricing for people in India who want to buy it. And I thought it would be such a controversial decision, and it so far hasn't been. But it's that, right? Because handmade dice are technically luxury products. You don't need more than a set of dice. Nobody needs more than a set of dice. But if you want them and you want, what I do is I have like the USD pricing, which is for folks who are not locals, and an INR pricing, which is significantly lower, but also makes it far more. It's still a lot, but it still like is accessible enough for people who would want to splurge on something like that. So I think 100% please pay creators what they deserve, and don't lowball them. But also I think money is the best way of supporting people for sure, but often that's not the case. Like if you can't pay creators, amplify their voices, don't
Yes.
speak for them, but if they're saying something, platform them. If that's a retweet, if that's a quote tweet with a little bit of your opinion, if that's a like, share, whatever it may be, platform them. And that's, it may seem insignificant, but it's really not. It like any eyes on a project could mean something for it, right? Like if you share it and one person's like, I want to go play that game, that's a paying customer that you helped get this creator. So amplifying voices is a great way of supporting creators, I think, from non-Western countries.
Amazing. We've got a question in the chat, which is for Wendy and Momatoes, and it is about how your games have always had a very unique and stylized art design. Where do you get the inspiration for the art design for your games? You know, with something like Arc in your case, Momentos, which is just so vibrant, and Wendy, the zine-like aesthetic in a lot of the games you've made so far. Um, um, yeah. Wendy, do you want to start us off?
This is the moment where I get to fangirl about Momatoes' work because I'm a real fan, and to have my work in some way in the same sentence as hers is like mind blowing. She is actually one of my inspirations. This like the opposite of minimalistic, like this. Um, I forgot the word. Like this artful. I hate that term, but can you go first, Momatoes, please? I got you excited for a moment.
Uh, now I feel a little bit, huh? Oh no. I think for me, the one of the main reasons for one of the main fuels for my aesthetic go basketball team is is the fact that I really just want to be able to hint at stories that just happen beneath the surface. And sometimes that requires having texture, colors that may be a little bit unusual, having eccentric ways of showing fonts and layout, because these go beyond the ordinary and start hopefully sparking a little bit of creative thought, like why does it look a little bit funny, I wonder if that means something. And I think that's, I don't know, it's something that's really delightful to me. I want it to be a little bit funny but also in hopefully provocative ways. All right, I'm done.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. I to be fair, I make stuff for myself mainly. So if I don't do it like that, I will find it boring, and I will not finish it. So that's one thing. And I try to like. There's so much sameness in the world as a whole that just by doing some bringing your different worldview to how you perceive, because aesthetics is politics, right? So when you try to break out of the sameness and seriousness of what is a serious document, that's a thing. And I'm queer as hell, so I try to make my games look weird and colorful. And this new game is like based and at the same time a response to stuff like the World of Darkness. So it has like that gothy stuff with red and black and purple, and trying to make it over the top, just because the world is so full of boringness. Why would we make our stuff boring?
Oh, absolutely. Right. So we have a question for Indrani. So Indrani, what inspired you to make your own dice company? And how did you feel about? How did you meet the challenges of starting and running a business for what you've described as a very niche community and hobby?
Um, Let me take you back to the beginning. Uh, 9 or 10-year-old Indrani always wanted to be able to collect something. I wanted to be that cool, eccentric person who has a collection of just something. But nobody wants to do stamps because everybody does stamps and coins. That's boring. And I never found the thing that I wanted to collect until I played D&D and tabletop role playing games. My friend gifted me my first set of dice, and I was like, "Wow, this is pretty. I bet I could have so many more of these, even though I totally don't need them. How am I gonna roll, 8d6 fireball damage with just 1d6? That's just unacceptable." So I went on the internet looking for pretty dice, and I found them, but not in India. Um, Even like basic Chessex stuff is not something that was available in India, or if it was insanely overpriced because of imports and whatnot. And then I had the grand idea of going, I should make this myself. How hard could it possibly be? Spoiler alert, it's really hard, but that's sort of I'm the stubborn kind of person who once sets their mind to doing something, I'll just do everything I can to get it done. And it was that stubbornness that got me to making dice because I wanted pretty dice and I could not have them, so I would make my own. And then the turning it into a business side of things, that was like a whole another um, ball game because often there's this pressure, and I don't know if this is a uniquely Indian thing or like an Indian parent thing, but people always want you to monetize what you do. Like if you're a good artist, you should sell art, or if you 3D print stuff, I have you thought of opening a shop. And I was always hesitant of doing something that I enjoyed for money because then there's pressure and there's expectations, and I'm not pleasing just my I'm not looking to just make myself happy with my dice, but also uh, other people, right? And that was a decision I had to make over, I think, 2 years, where I was like, fine, I'll just somebody wants to pay me for this, I'll give them a set. We'll see how it goes. And that was another set of challenges because India makes it very hard for you to start a business of your own. They'll say make in India, that's a thing that people ask you to do, but the amount of bureaucracy and paperwork and legal hoops that you need to jump through to be able to sell handmade dice is infuriating. But did all of that, and here we are. People seem to like what I make, and that baffles me every single day.
And if any of you are wondering, Indrani's dice company, Nonagon Dice, as featured on Critical Role,
Oh my god.
is India's first artisanal dice maker. So if you want to buy dice, go ahead by all means. Please commission Indrani to do so.
Is this the part where I plug? Because if you would like to know when my shop update goes live, because there's one coming soon, you can go to my website, nonagondice.com, and sign up for my newsletter. Or you can follow me on social media. You'll just find out a bit later, but you'll still find out.
To be fair,
Yeah.
this was more the point where I wanted to embarrass you by saying as featured on Critical Role.
Yeah, it's just. It is so weird to say out loud. But,
Yeah. So we have a
shout
question
out to
for
Anjali.
we have a question for you, Momatoes, and that is, so you mentioned how Arc is very much inspired by like OSR games. So this question is, in what ways do you feel the OSR movement is different in Southeast Asia than what it is in Britain or America, particularly with regard to inclusivity and diversity?
Ooh, this is a really tough question. First, I have to check if my mic is on. Yes, it is on. Okay. Secondly, it's quite difficult for me to answer because there is really no main OSR scene in the Philippines. There are people like me who have really positive experiences with it, and I have friends who love to play it, and I play with them, and there are others who also do, but it's not like a same collective movement as you can see abroad. And I think that's one of the biggest distinguishing features. There really isn't a cohesive movement per se, although you could also make that argument for um, America and abroad. But at the same time, you also don't have the same historicity assigned to it. So that has made it more possible for us to enjoy OSR free of its historical trappings of not being inclusive, it has also made it quite challenging to reconcile my own lived experiences of, oh, OSR is a very fun, and you could have rulings, you could explore, it's quite interesting, with the history as it's been established as not so savory. It's had a lot of really bad moments in its history. I guess in a way, the OSR we experience here in the Philippines is its own thing. It's like completely free of the historical trappings, and in a way, that's kind of liberating too.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
well, sorry, were you going to add something to this, Wendy?
No, I was just agreeing that it's really liberating not to have those uh, that historical baggage
Mm.
of RPGs as a whole. I think.
Yeah, baggage is a great word. Yeah.
Mm. Cool, because I've got one last question, which I think is an excellent note for us to end on. And that is, what excites all of you about the future of TTRPGs? And what do you suggest to have a sustainable relationship with making change in the role playing scene?
Um, mm, Again, one of those questions where you need a moment to think, I think. But um, for me, what's really exciting is the the just the way indie creators are being supported. I know there's so much to do and so far we need to go, but correct me if I'm wrong. I don't make games of my own, but I feel like there's a lot more visibility now than I feel like there was even 5 years ago. And as someone who came in to TTRPGs because of D&D and now has played a host of other tabletop role-playing games, just seeing what the world has to offer, what people have created is it brings me so much joy. So I think that's something I'm excited to see going ahead. And from a more selfish perspective, I'm excited to see more Indian people play the game. I want more native Indians to experience tabletop role playing games, not just D&D, but D&D as well, but everything that the space has to offer. And I'm hoping I get to continue playing a part in making that happen. And as for the second question, I need a moment to think.
No worries. Well, right. Wendy, what about you?
What excites me about the future of TTRPGs? I think first of all, what excites me is that the revolution is coming, and all gonna play in our communist utopia over the ashes of the previous system. Apart from that, I think it's looking beside me and seeing all these amazing people who are finally getting their turn, and getting to have their voices heard, because their voices were always there, but having their voices heard for real, as not just the token, but as more and more and more people. And that's not something that can be undone. We can't just erase that, and that's a thing, and that excites me about the future, because that's not something that can be undone. I think, and I'm really excited to see what the future is going to bring, because of that. And the second part of the question, I forgot. What was it?
Well, the second part of the question is, what would you suggest for us to do to have a sustainable relationship with making change in the role playing scene?
Yeah, I gotta
Um,
think. Go
Thank you for
ahead.
asking for the question again, Wendy, because I'd also forgotten the second one and I was like, whoops, but I've written it down now.
um, I think sustainability has a lot to do with kindness to yourself. I think people who are activists, I'm going to circle back to what I said earlier. I've seen activists, not just in this space, but in all spaces, sort of. Vivek, I'm looking at you too. Uh,
I am aware of that. I am aware of
yeah,
that.
yeah, who tend to burn out or overexert to the point where you've done so much and then you don't have the energy to keep going. I think to ration that energy, to know when to step away, to know when to let someone else handle it for you, or know that there are people around you who are also, vocalizing support, who are helping creators, who are, doing what needs to be done. So I think sustainability comes with kindness to yourself. Do what you need to do, but also take care of yourself and your mental health. Step away when you need to, because that's okay. Someone else will pick it up.
Right.
I think
This is where Indrani gets back to me for anyway. Right. What about you,
I
Mamatos?
think
Oh no, go on, Wendy.
sorry. I was just gonna say I think Indrani is personally attacking me too, so
Yeah, I'm
I don't
coming
know
for
what's
all of
going
you
on.
today.
Uh, right. So what about you, Mamatos? Is there any personal
Right.
grudge you want to settle on this panel, or do you have anything else to add to the answer to the question?
No, for me, I would like to be excited about what Wendy said, that there's more new stories, more new perspectives, and that's amazing. Like before, tabletop role playing was just guys in the basement playing with warfigs, and there was a manual that everybody played, and then now there's so many indie games. It's it's gonna be a long eternity before everybody manages to play all of these games. There's so many creative output coming out, so many new voices, and it's kind of like a renaissance of indie RPGs in a way that I feel. So that's really exciting for me. And as for being sustainable, being kind is really important because the burnout is real. Sometimes it can even be extremely tiring just going on Twitter, seeing hot takes, and then deciding, yep, I'm closing the internet, no more. So I think having a healthy sense of boundaries between what's healthy for you, what's healthy for the community, where your needs must start coming into consideration. Also need to conserve your spoons, and also making sure that you nothing is dominated by just Twitter. Sometimes there are also other voices outside of it, and making sure you do outreach and learn from everybody you encounter. Well, no, not maybe everybody, but learn from your encounters.
Hmm. And Yubi?
I think the thing that I'm really excited about going ahead is sort of twofold. And one is that for both the good stuff and the bad stuff, people in general are kind of waking up to the reality of the scene, and people are now starting to see not only the wonderfulness of the creativity that's going out, but they're seeing the injustices as well. And people are starting to kind of twig, like, oh, okay, there's so much going on here. And I think that I'm really excited about that, although it comes with its kind of blowback and as you said, stuff on Twitter and so on. And then in a kind of selfish vein, I'm very excited to see that people are taking digital accessibility a lot more seriously. So things like this convention being held online, even when a lot of other conventions are deciding to go ahead in person, things like people are starting to kind of think about, oh, I've made this PDF, but maybe it's really hard to read if someone's got dyslexia. I'll provide a plain text version. Like, that's fantastic. People are starting to kind of think, what other options can I actually do? I have the resources, the spoons, the ability to provide so that more people can start to access the work. And so those are the two things that I'm very excited about. And then for sustainable change, I think it's twofold again. I think one is kind of like humble yourself. So like ask like yourself sincerely, like, what is your story? What is your role in this? You know, just take a minute, take a step back. And like, I've been writing online since I was like 13. Like, I've had those beta readers who've like ripped into, and I've gone away and I've had my big cry. And like, you have to just kind of, ego can be a great thing and it can be really useful, and you have to have self-confidence, but just, take a breath, assess the scene, assess what you're trying to write, really think it through, humble yourself. And then, as everyone here has kind of been talking about, be a part of a community. Because when you're part of a community, not only will other people hold you accountable, as they should, you will also hold yourself accountable. As a group, you will decide on your ethics, on your moralities, and it will not be such an isolating experience where you feel like you're untethered and you're alone. So whatever that community looks like, whether it's related to part of your identity or whether it's related to your physical location or part of like what the genre of things that you write, try and find and build a community that you can be comfortable in, that you know respect who you are and that you respect who everyone else is it. And then when you have those, I think, core foundations, that is something sustainable from there on. And I think that Indrani was completely right. Like burnout is such a real thing, and I think that it can be really easy to become isolated in enough fashions that that burnout can really take over real quick, and that is not sustainable. But having community, assessing what you can bring, those two things will kind of guide you forward.
Amazing.
Um,
Oh,
I really needed to hear those answers. I just wanted to add that like real change is always collective, so that community part is really important in all areas, not just ours. But since all the answers were stuff that I needed to hear, I'm gonna just add some cliches from me that like from radical leftism that like as Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So if we strive to be like the new D&D or the new wizards, or just get to the top, there's not going to be change. If we're just focusing on like inclusion and diversity, we're not changing structures of oppression. And so for change to be sustainable, it has to be structural. I think that's really important. And for me as a radical leftist, that means not striving for capitalist ideals of success, even if we gotta make money and you know we gotta make money so we can make more stuff, because if we have to balance having to make money in other jobs and making stuff, we're not gonna be able to make everything we want. But our goals should not, for me at least, if we want to have sustainable change, not be to keep the same even the idea of an industry, is problematic for me. Even the idea of producing content is problematic for me. So I think I would really like to see structural change in what we hope to accomplish, you know.
well, thank you, Wendy, for like such a lovely sort of way of framing all of this and tying all of these discussions up into something that is honestly really inspiring and radical. I think that's a fantastic note for us to bring this discussion to a close, which again brings us to the end of this day's events at Compulsion Light. But before we go, we just like to remind everyone that Compulsion is a charity convention. This year, Compulsion itself is raising money for Empty Kitchens and Full Hearts. You can donate via the link on our Twitch page in our tip jar or via the QR code on the screen. But we acknowledge that a lot of our viewers would be watching from further afield and would prefer to donate to charities that are local to them. So we'd like to invite all of our guests to shout out any local organizations that do valuable work in their area that they'd like to encourage viewers to support. So Indrani, would you like to start us off?
Yes. The charity I'm going to shout out is Shanti Bhavan Children's Project. Shanti Bhavan is a poverty alleviation program and an education program which helps children from rural India who come from extremely poverty stricken families and gives them access to safety and education and supports them until their first day of a white collar job, essentially pulling them and their families and their communities out of generational poverty. Um, the schools are in India, but they're an US based organization, so you can donate both in USD and also in INR. So yeah, that's my charity. Full disclosure, I work for Shanti Bhavan. I am a part of their team, so um, if that is something you need to know, gonna put that out there for you all.
Great. Wendy, what about you?
My my charity is not a charity, it's a political movement. It's the homeless workers movement, Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Teto. It's a political movement around the struggle around homelessness in Brazil, and they're doing a lot of stuff, uh, particularly during the pandemic, because homeless people have been hit hard here. So, and you can donate through PayPal in US dollars as well, and pounds, whatever. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy, and especially for highlighting an organization that's a political campaign that is working directly with people. I think that's really valuable to emphasize as well.
Yeah,
Momatoes,
and it's helmed by homeless people. It's not like outside help.
absolutely. And Momatoes, what about you?
Right, so thank you so much for this, and I hope everybody supports LILAC, Purple Action for Indigenous Women's Rights. So they are an organization of Indigenous women leaders, which also include feminists, anthropologists, human rights advocates, environmentalists, and lawyers. And they help conduct research, dialogue, community building on issues affecting Indigenous women. So they've held policy dialogues with key government agencies and international platforms, and any support would be much appreciated.
Right. And finally, Yubi?
So I've just chosen a wee one because I would actually really encourage people to donate to the previous three charities rather than this one, you know, because it is more important. Mine is the Yorkshire Cat Rescue Sanctuary, whom I adopted a kitten from a while ago, and they're a fantastic little home run charity who look after abandoned and unwanted cats and kittens. But again, I've deliberately chosen quite like a, you know, like a little one, because I do think, especially when we're talking about how to share space and platforms, I would really encourage to donate to the previous three charities, rather than this one at the bottom of the list type thing.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for these outstanding recommendations. Each of these organizations do a lot of really valuable work, and as UB has just done, I would encourage everyone to consider donating to either Compulsion's charity or any of the charities you've heard mentioned today. Our chat mods would have posted links in the chat as well for you to get more information about. But yeah, so that's the end of today's events. We will be hosting one-shot games tomorrow at 1 p.m. UK time. You can find more information about that on the Compulsion website, which is Conpulsion, CONPulsion.org. And you can find our program with all the games listed up there. But having said all of that, I'd like to ask our chat and our audience to join me in thanking our outstanding panelists for all of their generosity with their insights and experience from all the different things they've done, from game design to community building. So thank you, Indrani, Momatoes, Wendi, and Yubi, for being part of this and for being so generous with your time and energy. I'd also like to thank Charlie Kelly for helping me devise all the hard questions that we put to our panelists, as well as Sophie, Hein, Holly Rankin, and Claire Bath for their help moderating the Twitch chat. And in particular to Claire for all the artwork and graphics that they've done for this event and the previous panel as well. And indeed for Compulsion Lite as a whole. Claire has been pulling so many shifts running our social media as well as doing the art. Thanks also to Sophie Hein and Alan Jackson for literally donating me the computer that I'm running the stream on. Could not have done this without both of you. I'm just honored to have such an outstanding team to be working with to make this con happen. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this event. I've been Vivek Santayana. I'm delighted to have had such outstanding people to share a panel with, and I hope to see all of you at the games tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye, everybody.
I don't know how long to keep waving for.
Yeah,